And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. A lot of people have been saying they really miss the music, and since I can't get it to work, I thought, how about a sing along? I expect to hear this on YouTube from other people soon. Baby Fly. Doot, 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 doot. Baby Fly. Okay, those of y'all that don't know what a baby fly is, well, anyway, tonight's show is brought to you by Organic Man Coffee Trike. Best coffee in the entire universe. Without coffee, the human race would have packed it in long ago. And coffee brought about the Industrial Revolution. Pick up the best coffee in the world at 4501 McPherson. Their office hours are 6:30 to 7 p.m. They're closed on Sunday, just like Chick-fil-A. If you aren't in Laredo, you can get the life affirming drink by going to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Sad news. The Wonderland UFO Festival has been canceled. I don't know why. Something to do with the upper management wanting to pursue other endeavors. It was a great event last year. I got a lot of good stories for my book, met folks from all over the place. Victoria told me they made a good profit. I guess maybe the folks in charge don't believe in flying saucers, or maybe somebody told them to knock it off. Those people, MIBs. Sunday, July 16th, 2023 at 2 p.m., I will be speaking at the McAllen Public Library, hopefully, uh, 4 4001 North 23rd Street. I'll be talking about the flying disc that crashed in Mexico in 1948. Before I get started, I just want to tell those folks out there keeping track of things I have no secret documents. I have no secret plans or photos of any secret locations. Everything I'm talking about is out there on the internet or in books in my library or at the public library. I don't know any whistleblowers. I don't have any secret contacts anywhere in the military or in the government. It's there's no need to come check my office out. I don't need to be raided like that guy in Las Vegas. There's already a big mess in my office. I don't need it screwed up any worse than it already is. I have nothing new to offer, and no secrets to be found here. Way back when UFOs were something most folks didn't talk about, I would buy Fortean Times, the After Dark newsletter, UFO magazine, things like that, any books I could find on the subject, and I would take them to work. People would all look at me like I had a screw loose or something. The magazines would wind up being thrown up on the dashboard or dropped on the floor, and they had coffee spilled on them anytime something came up that needed my immediate attention. By the end of the month, most of my magazines looked like they'd been beat up pretty badly, and they'd either wind up in the trash or somebody would borrow them from me and never return them. In one article in UFO Magazine, back when it was still on glossy paper with color pictures, before Bill Burns bought the thing, there was a photo of a tunnel boring machine, a TBM, with Air Force officers standing in front of it. The TBM had a huge Air Force insignia on it. The photo was taken out in the desert somewhere, and the writer said the photo was taken outside of Area 51 in the early 80s. When the big push came to turn Groom Lake into a bigger facility, the government ordered thousands of cement trucks and millions of dollars worth of construction material that don't add up to what you see in the satellite photos. Construction had begun back in 1955, but back then it was a couple of trailers and a hangar to park the U 2 under. As time marched on, more buildings were put up, more hangars, and much more security. The place grew fast, yet nobody knew what they were doing out there because it was all top secret. It was for our own good, national security. Since the CIA and the Air Force refused to acknowledge the place even existed, the money being spent there was kept secret. People would tell about seeing convoys of trucks hauling building material driving along some road in the desert. As they watched, the convoy would disappear into the ground. There was a fence between them and the convoy, so they couldn't get close and try to see where these trucks had gone to. But they figured that they'd entered some kind of a tunnel system. They weren't even near Area 51 at the time. Some folks will say that the government can't keep secrets. This is being said by the government. The Greenbrier Hotel in West Virginia held a secret from 1958 until 1995. People walked back and forth in front of this huge blast door, never knowing a 112,544 square foot fallout shelter was just on the other side. I sleep extra well at night, knowing if a nuclear war was to break out, my elected officials would be safe and sound in their little complex while I slowly die from radiation poisoning. The X 37B took off from Cape Canaveral in May 2020, just as the Black Plague of 2020 was the only thing you heard about in the news. The plane stayed in orbit for 908 days before landing at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Did you hear anything about it? Have you heard any of the details of what it was doing up there? Once again, a deep guarded government secret. It wasn't until the government decided to tell us about this plane that it hit the news. Like I said, the folks saying that the government can't keep secret, well, they all work for the government. Phil Schneider was a lecturer who spoke out on several underground bases run by the military. Schneider had worked for the government as an engineer for years. As he worked on various assignments, he began to suspect there was a lot more to these underground bases than the government was telling. These underground facilities were being put in all over the country. The military constructions were beginning to look like something sinister was in the works. During one assignment in 1979, Schneider was working on an underground base under Dulce, New Mexico, when he encountered aliens and a firefight broke out. He received some bad injuries, but he continued working for the government until he noticed a lot of his friends were dying under some unexplainable conditions. Several supposedly committed suicide, while many others were killed in unexplained vehicle accidents. Phil knew as much, if not more, than those already dead. So he began telling the world about the secret bases all over the country, hoping by shining a light on what was going on, it would help keep him alive. Schneider eventually joined his friends also on the other side of the life in an unexplainable condition. He supposedly tied a rubber tube around his own neck and strangled to death. This was after he had said many times if he died, it wasn't at his own hands. Just outside of Chicago, a team of guys were working for the state wildlife department. Their job was to row around the edges of the rivers, taking samples to see if there were any contaminants, things that might affect the fish or the wildlife. This was being done about every 10 years. Two of the three had been to this section of the river before, but they spotted something none of them remembered having seen. Right on the edge of the river, back in the brush, was a huge cement structure. It stood about 4 feet high. It was about 6 foot by 6 foot. Curiosity got to them. So they pulled over next to the unknown thing and got out of the boat. The cement object had an opening in the top with iron bars over the middle. It looked like some kind of a giant air intake. It was new. Well, at least it was less than 10 years old, since it wasn't there the last time they'd been there to check the water. Armed men suddenly appeared from the thick brush. Weapons were pointed at the three, and they were told not to move. The armed men were in some kind of a military looking uniform, but there were no patches designating who they belonged to. Each of the wildlife inspectors was searched, their wallets taken, and IDs were scrutinized. The equipment in the boat, boxes of containers for samples, siphons, scientific stuff, it was all pulled out of the boat and it was gone over, looking for some kind of evidence of some crime, maybe? The researchers were questioned. Why were they on this property? Did they know they were trespassing? Who had hired them to go snooping around on private property? The one that looked to be in charge of the armed force used his cell phone to make a few calls. The official wildlife department IDs were all run through the system for checks. Over the course of about an hour, these researchers' rights were violated quite a bit, but nobody actually got injured. When no connection to the Russians or any paramilitary group could be found, the one in charge told the three researchers to leave, not to talk about anything that they had seen, such as a big cement box, not to come back to that property again. They were told if they did, there would be trouble. They didn't say what kind of trouble, but when a guy with a gun tells you don't come back, well, it's a good idea to listen to him. Once they got back to their office, their supervisor wanted to know what these three guys had done to elicit phone calls from government agencies making accusations of their improprieties. All their samples were turned in for study, but their maps were taken away and destroyed. The supervisor said they wouldn't be needing those anymore since that section of the river was no longer going to be checked. The three were told to not talk about anything out of the ordinary. The whole armed encounter never happened. It took several years and a lot of thinking before one of the three decided to talk about what he'd seen. He never mentioned where around Chicago the air intake was located, but he did say it looked like it went way down into the ground to ventilate some giant underground facility. West of Chattanooga, Tennessee, is a cave system that was discovered by some cavers years ago. In the caves, they found a huge underground lake. The cavers explored as far as they could, vowing that they would return once they had a chance. When they did return, they discovered that the cave entrance had been sealed off. Any and all attempts to find out who had blocked the entrance and how they might gain access was fruitless. None of the city or state officials could give them any answers. The folks in charge were all higher up. If you want to have a huge underground base, you're going to need a supply of water. The more bases you have, the more water you're going to need. Not just for drinking, but to cool any machinery you might have and to dispose of things that need disposing of, like sewage. The history of the Cheyenne Mountains began in 1956 when a local commander suggested the construction of an underground command center to replace the vulnerable facility at Ent Air Force Base at Colorado Springs. Ent Air Force Base was built above ground, and the constant evolution of intercontinental missiles made it a potential target during an attack. The Nazi rocket scientists working for the Russians had proved a huge ability to launch extracontinental nuclear weapons after they had launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite sent by the human race into space back in 1957. The U.S. government created NORAD 1 year later. North American Aerospace Defense Command had an interesting plan to save the U.S. Any Soviet bombers loaded with atomic bombs coming over the North Pole would be intercepted and knocked out of the sky over Canada. As Canada burned to a crisp, the U.S. would then fire back at the Soviets, passing right over the ashes of our neighbors to the north. Yes, that was the plan, and the Canadian government agreed to it. So our bombers would be passing over where their bombers had been knocked out. A Cheyenne Mountain seemed an excellent place for a new base. It is located about the center of our continent, making it hard to reach. There haven't been any earthquake activity in the area as far as their research went. There are mountains all around the new base, which would hopefully get hit by the Soviet bombers instead of the underground base. The actual construction began in 1861. The excavation ended in 64, while the place became fully operational in 1966. The initial mission of Cheyenne Mountain was to protect the country against Russian bombers. In time, the objective went way farther than that. During the 60s and 70s, the intercontinental ballistic missiles came as a new threat for the U.S. NORAD developed new programs and techniques to defend against this new threat and launched the famous 427M by the end of the 70s. During the 80s, the place went through a new series of improvements. Almost $1 billion were invested by the 1987 for the new upgrades. Now, this wasn't what was spent to begin with, that was just the upgrades. Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station is located in Colorado Springs, a short distance from the NORAD facility. Uh, it's at Northern Command Headquarters, which is at Patterson Space Force Base. Uh, is it just me, or do you think that the Space Force insignia looks an awful lot like the Star Trek emblem? Have a look at it. That's what it looks like to me. The rumors and stories surrounding the Denver International Airport are too many to cover in just an hour. Those bizarre murals that used to decorate the walls were something out of a nightmare. Dead children and people killing each other. Just what you want to see as you're getting on board an airplane. The murals were either covered over or moved recently. I guess the overlords realized they were giving away too much information. Denver International Airport, or DIA for short, is a 53 square mile complex and is owned and operated by the city of Denver. At least that's what they say. During construction, a lot of buildings went on that made no sense at the time. Huge buildings were put in place only to be covered over with dirt. The official story was it had been decided that these buildings were not to be used after all, and so they were being discarded. One runway is 3 miles long. The average airport runway is about 1.5 to 2 miles. Why so long? Who uses a 3 mile long runway? Well, the space shuttle does. I wonder if the airport folks were planning ahead for space flights. Probably not. There's a weird connection between all of the runways that the space shuttle used to land and underground bases. Makes you wonder about that 3 mile long runway. Seen from outer space, you could see huge air exchange units out past the ends of those long runways. There were no buildings around for these air units. Why would you need an air intake in the middle of nowhere? Those who have looked into the construction of the airport have found huge tunnels were built supposedly to be used as baggage handling. The folks in charge decided the new baggage tunnel system wasn't working, so they simply shut it down and they left all those tunnels empty. That's what they're saying. The idea of putting an underground base under an airport is so many people could come and go on a regular basis and nobody would notice, as a lot of folks simply vanished downstairs. Some folks will say there's no way to move thousands of people around without taking notice of it. Have you looked at people lately? Most are so intent on looking at their cell phones they wouldn't notice if Bigfoot was standing right next to them. United Airlines, which flies out of DIA, is involved in the Department of Defense Air Transportation Program. In the event of some crisis, the elected folks in Washington would be whisked away from their homes and offices, and they would all be delivered to Denver. This is a part of the continuation of government, or the COG, a COG. A weird thing happened way back when I was still working. I was told to take my GPS and stand in front of my house, right in front of the front door. I was to log my location and send it to the front office, who in turn was going to send it to Washington. Now, I wasn't even a cog in the great machinery of the government. I might have been a tiny little screw, and that would have been about it. And like most people thought, I was loose. Why did they need to know my home's exact location? Yet the folks in Washington wanted the coordinates to my home. I used to wonder why most of the really paranoid people I knew worked for the government. Well, I'm now just as paranoid as any of the people I used to know. They did get some coordinates, but, well, it probably wasn't my house. The airport construction is supposed to have been finished back in the mid 1990s, yet dirt keeps piling up around the airport. The dirt originally pulled from the ground during the tunnel construction is still being added to. Some folks are beginning to worry that the mountain of dirt is going to begin to interfere with air traffic. A radar can't see over this obstruction. Some dirt from construction was to be hauled to the landfill over the course of the next 50 or 60 years as improvements were added to the complex. However, the mountain of dirt was already at its highest projected level in just under 4 years. Where did all that dirt come from? As I was putting this show together, I got to thinking maybe the elites would also want to get in on the underground facility under the DIA. Now, then it dawned on me if I had as much money as those folks, I'd have my own bunker somewhere, far as possible from a bunch of politicians. Phil Schneider had said there were two underground bases in every state. Seeing as most New England states are kind of small, I'd guess that Texas would probably have five or six. Colorado would have at least two, maybe three. Now we know about that thing under Denver Airport, and we know about Cheyenne Mountain. But what else could be out there? There's something for sure. Alamosa, Colorado is supposed to not only have an underground base, but it is occupied by beings from distant stars. People report seeing saucer shaped flying craft that disappear into the ground in that area. There is a UFO watchtower nearby. It's a tower that you can sit on and watch the skies. The tower is located at 2502 County Road 61 in Hooper, Colorado. It's about 15 miles north of Alamosa. You can sit up there and you can do like the guy said in the end of the thing. You can watch the skies. I spent a lot of time at Fort Hood in Texas. I hardly ever saw the inside of the barracks since we were a tank unit and we spent most of our time in or on our tanks. That fort is huge. It covers 332 square miles. That's what we know of. Between March 28th and September 17th, 1958, Elvis Presley completed his basic training and his advanced military training while at Fort Hood. Originally known as Project 76, miners carved an intricate tunnel system into the hillside of what is now known as West Fort Hood. At the time, they had no idea where or why they were building tunnels. They just were told, make some tunnels. The tunnel complex was completed in 1949, and the secret underground complex was one of 7 that the government built to store nuclear weapons, to work on these nuclear weapons, and to have them ready in case it was time to take out the Soviets. The tunnels were 20 feet across and 30 feet high. Huge military vehicles could come and go. The drivers were also kept in the dark. They would drive in, the soldiers would unload the cargo while the driver was told to stay in the cab. Then he would drive out, never knowing what he'd been hauling. Now, civilians will probably find this odd, but anybody that was in uniform will understand. You do as you're told and you keep your mouth shut. The facility was completely self contained. It had living quarters, it had a kitchen area. Rest and recreation was just a day room, and they had their own latrines. It had its own power system as well as a backup power system, so they could be completely self contained. For 20 years, the tunnel remained a top secret location where atomic weapons were stored, maintained, and repaired. The place had guard towers and barbed wire and machine gun pillboxes, all the best security that was known during the Cold War. Even the guards were kept in the dark, not allowed inside the complex. They were simply told nobody gets in here alive. They were told to keep people out, not what was inside. 1969, the tunnel complex was deactivated by the Department of Defense and the atomic weapons were removed. After major safety modifications, the tunnels were reopened in 2003 as the Fort Hood Underground Training Facility. This complex is supposed to be the only underground tunnel system in the U.S. specifically used for training. For some odd reason, I just don't believe that. Units and agencies travel from across the nation to train in the Fort Hood tunnels. From 1969 until 2003, the tunnels were supposed to have been unused. In just over 30 years, a lot of expansion could have taken place. Things go on in military complexes as well as under them that we never hear about. When I was at Fort Hood, we would see trucks and earth moving equipment all over the place doing things that we weren't told about, and we really didn't care. Not getting paid to worry about it, and we all had more important things to think about, such as who's got cigarettes, when is dinner, and where can I find a good place to sleep. In the late 1950s and early 60s, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was heating up, and the threat of nuclear war was a real possibility. To prepare for that threat, the U.S. government began building a series of underground bunkers to protect federal civil defense workers who would respond to the aftermath of a nuclear strike. I don't know what you're going to do, go around and count bodies. Anyway, one of those bunkers was built outside of Dallas in Denton, Texas. The Eisenhower administration realized that we needed a place for federal employees to seek shelter from a nuclear attack, and this was one of 5 facilities built outside of Washington, D.C. Not much sense in politicians surviving a nuclear weapons falling all around only to pop out from hiding with nobody left to order around. The facilities had to be a certain distance away from any major metropolitan area, and they had to also be close to a Nike missile battery. And at the time, there was one just about 3 or 4 miles from Denton. The Denton Underground Fortress was designed to survive a 1 megaton nuclear blast detonated within a mile of the facility. It was equipped with power generators, an air filtration system, several blast doors that covered the stairwells and the elevators, and that led to the 2 underground floors. All the electrical wiring and the plumbing were shock mounted, so that when a shock wave from a nuclear blast a couple of miles away came through, everything would slip back and forth, hopefully not breaking anything. If you've ever seen how Cheyenne Mountain is built, everything sits on huge shock absorbers. Well, they did the same thing in Denton. The underground facility had an industrial grade kitchen that could cook meals for up to 300 people 3 times a day for the next 30 days. There were escape hatches and observation towers that could be used by workers to check the area after an attack. Yeah, well, yeah, everybody is dead. The whole town is Kaputski. Call Washington and tell them I quit. If the folks underground wanted to see what was going on outside after a nuclear attack, somebody would have to climb up a ladder, open several steel doors, open a steel portal, and then look out. There were 2 emergency escape hatches built into the building. A survivor would have to pull on a chain connected to an escape hatch. It would take 15 minutes to open the hatch. This was the backup for in case they couldn't get the blast doors open and they had to leave. The facility also contained a state of the art communications room to keep in contact with the outside world. The room was protected from electromagnetic pulses by having copper sheeting in the floors, walls, and the ceilings. They also had huge copper rods that were driven down into the ground. It was a giant Faraday cage. In the event their antennas got blown away, there were 3 telescoping antennas on the property. Somebody would have to go outside, move any debris from the antennas, and then raise them manually. I don't have that sense of duty. I would have gone looking for other folks who might still be alive. Let those folks in Washington wonder whatever happened to those folks in those underground bunkers we built using taxpayers' dollars. I guess that's why they never gave me access to any places like this. Denton might not be an enormous underground complex, but how many of y'all even knew that it was there? What are the odds it might be connected to other underground facilities that we know nothing about? Think about the Navy. The cities come to mind, such as Pearl Harbor, San Diego, Philadelphia, coastal towns. How about Millington, Tennessee, 21 miles north of Memphis? The Naval Support Activity Mid South Base is located just about as far west in Tennessee as you can get. NSA also has a facility in Millington. The locals say that this base is sitting atop hundreds of tunnels that stretch out in all directions. The base covers thousands of acres, most of which are deep under the surface. The problem with researching secret underground bases is, well, they're secret. Most of what I'm telling you is found by reading as many websites as I could find that all pertained to DUMBs, deep underground military bases. Can't smart today, I has the DUMBs. In 1960, C.F. Austin of the China Lake Naval Ordnance Test Station proposed the rock site concept, which would involve manned undersea installations excavated into the rock of the coast on the seafloor. By applying well understood principles that were already being employed for decades by mining industry, Austin proposed that large bases could be constructed and operated anywhere suitable bedrock occurred in the ocean and at any depth. Austin realized that even in the mid 60s technology, it would be possible to sink a wide shaft into the seafloor, seal and drain it, then use it as a staging area for further excavation. A tunnel boring machine could be lowered into the shaft in pieces and then assembled to bore out more tunnels, including one for a small nuclear module reactor, much like the one used at Camp Century in Greenland and the McMurdo base in Antarctica. According to Austin, one Nova Scotia mine, the Dominion Coal's Cape Breton operation, consisted of a complex of many consolidated undersea mines ranging in depth from 200 to 2,700 feet below the sea floor, with the water covering of 60 to 100 feet. These mines span an area of approximately 75 square miles, and at the time they employed 4,100 men in an undersea mining system. This is not some science fiction movie plot. The mine is real, and so was the idea of building offshore undersea bases back in the 60s. Among the benefits of rock site, Austin noted its immunity to weather and currents, its shirt sleeve environment, and its highly controlled access. Austin was not thinking small. He said structures within the sea floor can easily be made large and comfortable enough to permit quartering of crews and their families for extended periods of time, and can be made large enough to serve as supply and repair depots for large submarines. Recent research on hardened missile basing concepts have proven various techniques for creating submarine-sized structures in hard substrate. The Air Force's development of underground silos, subways, and and command structures produced a real-world hardware and an experience with construction techniques. The rock site concept also bore much in common with NASA's design for an underground moon base. Very likely all three concepts, invulnerable bastions, space outposts, and ocean bases, would have shared solutions to issues ranging from environmental controls to the crew's morale. Austin foresaw that rock site bases could be ideal for industrial use, such as oil production and deep sea mining. In the decades since Austin's study, industry has created the tools needed to realize his vision. The world's largest tunnel boring machine is about to drill a 2-mile long tunnel under Seattle, wide enough for a Ohio class submarine to sail through. If the press is talking about it today, it's probably old news. In the 1970s, the Los Alamos National Lab investigated an atomic rock drilling machine called the nuclear subterranean. They wanted to look into building underground or under the seafloor bases using atomic power. A company has already come up with a remote controlled drilling rig used to build and service offshore wind generating power plants. This rig dives down to the seafloor, drills the holes needed to anchor the wind turbines, then drills inland so that the electricity can be harvested. Offshore oil production is a hazardous occupation. Building oil production facilities in controlled environments underground, as in under the seafloor, has the potential to take at least some of the variables out of the equation. The tunnels would provide human access to the wellheads in deep water and could be monitored for leaks and other malfunctions. More than 40 subsea tunnels have been completed in Norway since their excavation was first proposed. 25 of these are road tunnels, 8 are oil pipeline tunnels, and 8 are water supply tunnels. All of these tunnels were excavated by conventional drill and blast methods. Now, using TBMs, the number and location of these underground facilities is not just a possibility, but a reality. TBMs were first designed in 1880 by Colonel Frederick Beaumont and Thomas English. The machine was steam powered and it moved by a kind of a walking along system along the dirt floor. The rails were laid at the same time that the machine drilled through the rocks and the dirt. The debris was hauled out using mining cars hooked to a winch. The working end of the TBM was a huge rotating disc that would grind the rock and dirt, dropping it into a conveyor belt bucket system. Dirt that fell to the bottom of the tunnel in front of the TBM had to be removed as well. Men would scoop up the debris, this was known as mucking, and throw it onto the buckets that would carry the mess to the back end of the machine. From there, it was transported out of the tunnel by carts. Steam was used to rotate the grinding wheel and to push the entire device forward. The tracks the machine sat on were attached to wheels that would lift the rails up, rotate them forward, and then put them back down, advancing the TBM a few feet each time. It would look kind of like the machine was walking. Men had to place the ceiling and the wall supports to make the tunnel safe. It was hard, dangerous work, but far easier and safer than using picks and dynamite. If you feel like the job you're doing isn't all that great, go back and read about what used to pass for jobs. What you're doing isn't all that bad. The steam was created by a boiler system mounted to the back end of the machine. All the smoke was pumped out and left to just drift out of the tunnel whenever it got a chance. The heat from the boiler was dissipated into the air, making it hot and damp. The work day was anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and you worked 6 days a week. If you were lucky, you got Sundays off. The TBMs used today are electric, kind of like a diesel electric train. The diesel engine has to be located outside the tunnel due to fumes. Hard rock TBMs tunnel along, making a hole through solid rock. The rock makes the walls of the tunnel. Soft rock TBMs have to place panels to keep the tunnel looking like a tunnel and not a pile of dirt. The panels are lifted and secured by the TBM as it moves along. Dirt and crushed rock have to be removed by a conveyor belt to the rear of the construction site, and then it's trucked out and dumped. Anywhere a TBM is working, you're going to have massive piles of dirt somewhere, like, oh, say, the Denver International Airport. These dirt piles are a problem that some folks wanted to do away with. By extrapolating the pile size, you could figure out how big the underground structure might be. Tracks from the trucks moving the dirt would still show up no matter how hard you tried to erase them. You can see them from satellite. You simply follow the vehicle tracks back to their origination and you'll know where the tunnel is. There is also the need to expel the exhaust from the electric generators. This would be seen as heat from a satellite. Those underground bases where aliens are working alongside humans, or maybe they're their lords and masters, they're using alien technology to get around these signs of activity. Their TBMs are being used by power of technology from distant stars, and they don't produce piles of dirt. The machines melt the rock and the dirt, turning it into a glass like substance that the walls and the floors of the tunnel are made of. It's smooth and round. The floor is put in to hold tracks so that more alien technology can be used to transport either people or beings from one end of our country to the other in somewhere around an hour. Maglev trains are used to travel at speeds that you just can't get above ground. Just how deep can a tunnel go? In 1989, the Soviet Union finished their deep borehole on the Kola Peninsula near the Norwegian border. The drilling rig was able to reach 40,220 feet. That's just over 7.5 miles deep. The scientists running the operation heard terrifying sounds coming from below, so they sealed the hole shut. Many folks believed that they had drilled into hell and that the sounds were coming from those condemned souls of murderers, politicians, and people that don't like cats. Well, something like that. Okay, just bad people. Good people like cats. Well, except for Dr. Evil and Blowfield. Many folks believed they had drilled into hell and the sounds were coming from the condemned. Since then, nobody has drilled or tunneled down nearly as deep, or at least that's what they'll tell us. To live far underground, you'd need a supply of oxygen. That is, if you're not an alien who doesn't need O2. The water could be taken care of by that huge underground lake found near Chattanooga, or any other underground water source. Using alien technology, perhaps they can extract oxygen from the water. After all, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. You breathe the oxygen and then you use the hydrogen for fuel. We are told the ground under our feet is solid. Well, scientists have discovered there might be water down there. Lots of water. By using scientific stuff, the boys in the white lab coats have discovered there's more water under our feet than in all of the oceans combined. They say the amount of water on the surface is roughly 25% of the total water of our planet. This would make you wonder how some countries are dying from a drought. The folks who run the planet decide who gets the water and who doesn't. Those commercials on TV telling people to invest in gold for the future, well, the huge conglomerates are actually investing in water rights. Sitka, Alaska is home to one of the world's most spectacular and beautiful lakes. Blue Lake holds trillions of gallons of water, so pure that you don't even have to treat it. You can just scoop it up and drink it. The city's population is fewer than 10,000 people. There's a plan in the works to remove billions of gallons of Blue Lake water by way of tankers and ship it to bottling facilities near Mumbai. Ships filled with water plowing through the water. I guess if you spring a leak, it won't damage the ocean. From there, it will be dispersed among several drought plagued cities throughout the Middle East. The project is the brainchild of two American companies. True Alaska Bottling has purchased the rights to transfer billions of gallons of water a year from the Sitka's reservoirs. The other, S2C Global, is also building a water processing facility in India. They want to turn life's most essential product into a global commodity. Meanwhile, in California, their water supply coming from the Colorado River is drying up. Well, I guess recently they did have too much rain, but still, they live in the desert and they don't have a really good supply of water. How about somebody, say, I don't know, maybe our government, putting in a huge pipeline from Alaska to California to alleviate their troubles? Ah, there's not enough profit involved, I guess. There are 52 people in Washington right now that are supposed to represent the folks in California. How come they don't put their political differences aside and do something for the folks back home? Well, just a thought. Maybe some of y'all living out there in California should call your congressmen or your representatives and tell them, hey, how about we get some of that Blue Lake water? I keep hearing about how some people are hearing a humming sound coming from the ground. Some even feel vibrations as if the ground under their feet is being shaken. Machinery sometimes gets screwed up. A bearing goes bad, and it causes shaking and vibration. When authorities go to study the sound, they usually don't find anything. Phil Schneider also said there were about 1,400 underground bases all around the world. This was back in 1995. I'm sure the folks doing the tunneling didn't all decide to stop at once. While studying for this show, I found all kinds of maps showing tunnels that are said to reach from the center of the United States to Moscow, with underground bases scattered in between. Every industrialized country on our planet has some kind of a deep underground base, usually close to, if not right under, their capital. We've heard about Eisenhower's exit speech, where he warned us about the military industrial complex. When huge piles of money can be made while fighting a war in some far off distant land, those who have very few morals or scruples will find ways of keeping a war going. You'd have to have blinders on to believe that the folks in Russia and China aren't facing the same problems. If you haven't read 1984 yet, maybe you should go find a copy and see what it has to say about the world we live in today. I read it back, I think it was 1974, and I thought that was a very depressing book. This could never happen, I thought. Well, it turns out it is just a playbook for the world today. By keeping people focused on fighting those people, the elite can make enormous profits while keeping everybody's attentions focused on things other than the man behind the curtain. The constant parade of who did what to whom on TV, it keeps most people so divided there's no way people will wonder, why are there no flying cars yet? How come food costs so much? Why do kids go to school but they don't learn anything about how to be happy in their lives or how to live without being in debt? As far as the deep underground bases go, who are they there to protect? I doubt the military from some other country is the reason for the dumbs. The excuse, but not the reason. Seeing as aliens from distant stars are already here, it's not to keep us safe from them. One of the few reasons that I could come up with is maybe one of those huge meteorites that we keep hearing about, or maybe a comet is coming our way and they know about it, but or they suspect that it's going to hit the planet and it's going to bring about a new and not so wonderful landscape for a while. And maybe that's why they're building these underground tunnels. You know the story of the ant people from the Hopis? I, for one, would not consider living deep below the surface. There's no windows, no trees, there's no great outdoors. Have you read the book Wool? Well, it's actually the Silo series now. The first book is called Wool. It's about people living underground after the surface world has become unlivable due to war. Once again, here's a set of books that everybody should read. It will give you a perspective on how things could go. Read the book. The TV folks tend to ruin good stories when they try to bend things to their agendas. The book is far better than the TV show. Next time you feel a vibration through the floor or you hear a humming sound, don't worry about it. It's just the secret tunnel going somewhere that you may never see. I know the government has to keep secrets. If the government told us everything they knew, they would tell the enemy as well. I don't really care if there are secret underground bases. I do care that so much money is being spent on things that won't benefit me or my family. I could use some of that $5.8 trillion dollars that the government is going to spend on underground bases and studying what monkeys do if they're given hormone treatments. A Florida lab is in line to receive $477,000 so they can dose rhesus monkeys with feminizing hormones. The experiment was funded by Dr. Fauci, National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. Yes, the Black Plague of 2020 guy. It's Fauci, Fauci. I always mispronounce his name. Dr. Fauci. Uh, anyway, the idea is that they want to study transgender monkeys so they can figure out why transgender male to female humans suffer the highest levels of HIV infection. Maybe instead of turning male monkeys into female monkeys, they could just ask the people, what are you doing that is leading to you and a bunch of your friends from being so high in the HIV world? Stop killing all those poor monkeys. Man, what'd the monkeys ever do to anybody besides throw poop at you? Oh well. Meanwhile, the roads and the bridges all over our country is falling apart. Where was it? Pittsburgh? They just had a part of their highway fall in. I hope I didn't depress you too much. The trouble with doing any show on secret government projects is, well, they're secret and it's hard to get any real information on it. Like I said in the beginning, I do not have any secret documents. I don't have any contacts in the government giving me information. This is just what I was able to read. If you'd like to get a t shirt like this one, advertising my book, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal, you can find it at tpublic.com. I could always use a little extra cash since I paid a bunch of taxes and I haven't gotten any of it back. If you'd like to read one of my books, you can find those at amazon.com. Just look for Chris James, but there's like 10 other writers with my name. And now for the exit music. What is it? Baby Fly? Doot doot doot. Baby Fly. Like I said, you don't know what a baby fly is. Go look it up. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.